So the title of the talk today is How to Actually Be Happy. A clue, it's not about solving your problems. I feel like I've done this title before. It gets recycled. Yeah, so if I have done this title before, then yeah, you understand why. If you're a long-time viewer, it's hard to find variations of titles when you've been doing talks for 12 years online, I think. I know maybe I've been doing the Zooms for 10 years. But yeah. So, yes. So just a bit of a disclaimer before we begin. I'm going really Australian, I can feel that. Just a reminder that these talks, I see these talks as meditations. I don't really see it as me giving information, although I am giving information. But the information that I give is widely available on the internet, and a lot of non-duality teachers speak about it, and maybe are even more eloquent than I am, and find better ways of describing it or putting it in context. What I see happening here is a meditation that I'm inviting you into stillness. That's originally what satsang means, is an invitation into truth, and truth to me is stillness. Yeah. So, and this isn't therapy. A lot of people get that a bit muddled and think that this is therapy. And it's not. Yeah. Obviously, there's working on the person, and there's a talking about the person. Yeah, there is stuff that will be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. And I think it's important to distinguish that so you can really see the objective of what satsang is, or meeting in truth is. It's an invitation to stillness and to silence. And sometimes people mix the two together, and I'm not judging or saying that's wrong, but just particularly here, and I mix the two together, sorry. But just to be clear that I see these talks, with my intention as an invitation to silence. I don't see them as me doing therapy or imparting information that you've not known before, although I'm sure that happens. So my suggestion, even though my teacher would say there can never be prescription, there can only be a description of something that may or may not happen. My suggestion would be to try to listen to me, not from the mind, but from a deeper place. And that might be really confusing, and hopefully the talks can enlighten you on what that means and help guide you to that place. And it's not a mental place. Some people might say it's like from the heart, and sort of, but I would just go that it's a bit further than the heart. So just encourage to go even further than that. Yeah. So that is the disclaimer before the talk. And then the next disclaimer is that non-duality is a really radical subject that Westerners really aren't inclined to and aren't brought up with this idea. Where in the East, the idea that God is all, God is everything, is just the norm. It's the way they see life is, or they might not see life that way, but it's what they're brought up with. So like we're brought up with the idea that God is somebody that lives up on a cloud. That's what I used to think. And looks down on us and judges us for good or bad, and also guides us and helps us and has this way of living. In the East, it tends to be the opposite, that God is the creator of all things and God is you. It's such a different mentality. And in the West, try to look at it through logic and science and understanding. And that's okay, but but it has to go deeper than that. It has to go to something else. Yeah. So when Westerners hear this subject, they get it all confuddled and muddled because it's such an alien concept that God is all. God is up there and judging me, or he doesn't exist, and all there is science and facts. So the title is a little bit of a con. How to be happy. It's something that Ramesh Balsekar and Roger Castillo, my teachers, would talk about. How to be happy in daily life. But they talk about the subject from a different angle. So from the angle that I speak about it, it would be, the first question would be, who would be happy? Who is the person that believes it's happy? And it's so interesting because there's such an alien concept to Western minds, but that's such a normal concept in the East. It's funny, right? Or a more normal concept. I'm just waiting for the words to come. One trusts that they will. I suspect that a lot of people in our society are deeply suffering. But they don't know they're deeply suffering because they're fast asleep. They're dreaming a reality. And in their dream, for most people, it's too painful to acknowledge that they're suffering. So they tell themselves stories about a different reality that's happening. So when they're deeply stressed and deeply disturbed, they're telling themselves a story of something else. It could be about how the neighbor's deeply disturbed. Could be about how other people are bad people, or could be about wanting to save this planet, like that they're deeply upset about the way people treat this planet and they're trying to think of ways to save the planet. And there's no acknowledgement that there is deep discomfort and suffering that's appearing in them. It's projected outwards, and then they're telling a narrative of something else. And if they were to become present for a moment and not be lost in their dreamscape, they would be presented with incredibly uncomfortable sensations and feelings in the body. Because there's been many years of suppressing that, denying that, and living in their dream of what's happening rather than what's actually happening. So it's like they've got a dream and then they've got this body tagging on that they're completely unconscious of. I was in my early 20s when I came in contact with Buddhism, maybe in my late teens actually, but I didn't start practicing till really practicing. So there was a knowledge of it, but really practicing until my early 20s. And when I first started meditating and becoming aware of my body, I was shocked at how much pain I was in when I was, relatively young. If you'd asked me before that, I would have always said I'm happy. Even though, yeah, there are lots of things that indicated I wasn't happy, I would have always insisted I was happy. Even there could be bad days where you're like, oh no, it's all shit. But most of the time I would have insisted I was happy, generally. But then when I started practicing meditation and becoming aware of my body, it was horrifying to realize how much pain my body was in and how much discrepancy there was between my narrative of what was happening and the experience in the body. So, for example, the narrative would be that I'm not angry, but my body would be furious. The narrative would be that I feel happy, but my body would be anxious. And that discrepancy was huge between my narrative of what I wanted to be, even though I wasn't even aware that I was wanting to be something. It was just the narrative I lived in, the dream I lived in, and then the actuality of what was happening. And my life was leaking, you know. I'd be in relationship and get angry for very little reason, have blames, you know, like cause problems here or that, you know, my whole narrative was leaking. You know, it was like trying to patch up a leaking boat, you know, with no patches. So you're in a boat that's sinking and you're quickly trying to patch things up. So it wasn't like I could maintain these ideas of what I thought I was, good person or happy person or creative person or nice person or altruistic person, because I couldn't patch it up, because there was the story of what I wanted to be, and then there was the reality of what my body was feeling. And so it was shocking. And even when I was practicing meditation, there was a want to block that out. And even though I'd done therapy and was doing therapy while practicing Buddhism and different types of therapies, there was still a want to block that out, to not really be honest with what my body was feeling. You know, if someone said, "How are you?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm great." And my body would be like, "You're fucking awful. You feel like a wreck. Your heart chakra is burning because you feel really abandoned and unloved." Yeah. Even in spiritual groups, you know, it'd be hard to be honest. And there wasn't always a consciousness of it because there was a blocking that happened. It wasn't until I lived with Roger Castillo for 3.5 years where he radically pointed out my contradictions, that there was going more and more into the body and actually understanding what was going on. And that this dream of me wasn't me at all. And also the sensations, the emotions, the feelings that were happening in the body wasn't me. But it goes through stages, you know. You first begin to realize the lie of your dream imagination of yourself. And then you become more present to actually the responses in your body and just the innocence of them, that, you know, you didn't make them happen. There's something that's formed over many years, maybe even thousands of years. It's also the acceptance of them. And there's the working on them to change them and release these energies and the stories. And yeah, all these different processes that you go through. But my point is that I suspect that most of the people in society are really suffering and they don't know they're suffering because they're telling themselves a different story. But if you pull out in front of them by accident, then you'll see like the mask slip and great rage, how do you know, like the rage will come out. Yeah. Or if you don't validate their story, the rage will come out. Or if you don't cover up their shame, the rage will come out. And I suspect it's getting worse in society because we're living in a very poisonous environment. It's beautiful and it's divine, but poisonous is in like, you know, we've evolved really quickly and we created all these things that we didn't really know the side effect of. So a lot of our environment is very plasticky. We're drinking plastic, which changes the structure of our body, and it's mostly changing it so quickly that there's discomfort from that area as well. Because the body and the feelings and the emotions and the thinking is all so deeply connected. And then we've got mass farming, which means that we've got lack of nutrients in the vegetables and the food we eat. So this is like double whammy. There is the story, the illusion that we're living in. And then there's also the fact that our environment has changed so radically in the last 100, 200 years. And we've not really known the effect of all the chemicals that we've created and all the alchemy that we've done on our systems. So, yeah, there's been a lot of growth of autoimmune diseases, cancer in the last years. So let's go to why people suffer. So from non-duality perspective and from Buddhist perspective as well, the reason in why you suffer is because there is an illusory person that believes that happiness is found in a dream themselves. So what I mean is that the person is dreaming of themselves. So they're not actually here right now, present to what's happening. They're dreaming. So there's like a veil that's appearing and they're dreaming a reality. So they're not sitting looking at me. They're looking at me through a dream of themselves. And the dream of themselves is something that is often called the seeker. And the seeker is dreaming themselves, and then from dreaming themselves and in their imagination and their dream, they're seeking to achieve things and avoid things. So the Buddhists would call it craving. And they're believing that these things will bring them happiness or bring them unhappiness. And that's what most people are doing. So they've got this body with the apparent emotions and then also what's happening with our environment, like the effect that our environment is happening on us. And then so that's changing. And then they've got their imagination of themselves on top of that. And that imagination is being affected by the body, but they're not conscious of that. It's really all connected. And in this imagination of themselves, they're always believing that in the future, there will be this rest. There will be this feeling of home. If I'm loved, if I'm appreciated, if I'm successful, if I have money, if I find a community, if I become better, if I'm nicer to my partner, if I find the perfect partner, if I have kids, if I exercise more, if I do yoga more, if I meditate more. And they're dreaming of this future which they're going to arrive at, and then they're working to get to this future. They're working to get to this imagination of paradise. And that can have some positive effects, like the imagination of all these positive things can have positive effects in the body, and it can send good energies through the body. This hope that they're going to arrive. It's better than being in fear, than always afraid of all these things that are going to catch up with you and kill you and eat you and destroy you. But it's still this dream. There's not actually presence. There's not actually truth and being who you truly are, which is presence, beingness, what is. So there's still this dream, this illusion that the whole of society are hypnotized by. And then people go and find friends that validate their reality. So if their reality is very fear-bound, they'll find other fear-bound people, or they'll find people that are trying to save them. And they'll live in this mental reality, and then they'll have friends that are seemingly coming into their mental, imagined reality, validating their story or disagreeing with their story or whatever it is, but all the same supporting the story. Saying, yeah, that's true. That is who you are. And that is what you've got to do to be happy. And that's what you've got to avoid to not be unhappy. And never, ever, ever, well, actually, I'm sure sometimes, but most of the time in Western culture, it's suggested that actually it's a coming out of the dream that's the happiness, that's the freedom. So it's not found in this dream of you, an achievement, but it's actually coming out of it. And coming out of it is what in non-duality would call coming home. And that would be becoming present again. So the Buddhists would say, live in the moment, whereas maybe the non-dualists would be more seeing that who you are is consciousness and not the person, or no self, or nothing and everything. Doesn't really matter the words, but it's a coming out of this dream of you, and that you are going to arrive somewhere in the future. And discovering that what you are isn't limited, isn't something in time, and isn't separate from everything that's happening. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, the realization of what you are. It's the biggest thing there is. Yeah. I mean, in the East, they would just call it God. But we have issues here with individualism and narcissism and the word God and all those things. So it's a difficult word to go in and use, God. Yes. So how to be happy? Well, if we say happiness is freedom, it's not in a feeling, in an event, in any form of imagination of you. So not in a sensory experience, not in getting something, not in avoiding something, not in becoming good, not in getting rid of your past, not in correcting all your mistakes. It's not in any of that. And that is so juicy. Even people on this path for many years still get sucked into it being a sensation, a feeling, an idea. All of those come and go. To wake up from the dream of you, you have to go beyond the sensory world, beyond all that's sensed, and beyond all that's dreamt. And you is dreamt. Who are you right now without imagination and thought? So I come from predominantly the background of non-duality, but I was practicing Buddhist for 5 or 6 years, I don't know how long. So there was so much Buddhist input as well. Recently, I found my original Buddhist teachers' tapes on Audible. So when I was younger, I used to go to the Buddhist center, the local Buddhist center, and they had a library of audio tapes, cassette tapes. Yeah, it wasn't even CDs, it was cassettes. And because of my dyslexia, having this resource at the Buddhist center was like phenomenal. And I was obsessive. I have this part of me that when I fixate on something, I'm like, So they had like a whole massive wall of all of these cassettes, of all these talks that Sangharakshita had ever given. And I kind of forget, about this. I listened to all of them methodically. And so recently I found him on Audible. Someone's put some of his cassettes on Audible. And it was so beautiful to hear his voice again. So many years ago, there was this obsession of listening. Yeah, so why was there a speaking about this? It was to do with from non-duality perspective versus Buddhist perspective. So when I was learning Buddhism, they would point a lot more to being present, to you being present. And that's beautiful. And that's got relevance. And they would talk a lot about focusing the mind and compassion and love. And that's so beautiful, such beautiful teaching. But then eventually there was this pull towards non-duality, and they speak differently. I feel like it's the same. You just have to listen with like dislocated ears to hear the meaning of it. It's so beautiful, all these teachings. I mean, what grace that they came to humankind. Um, yeah. So from a non-duality perspective, and this is what more resonated with me after a period. I couldn't have heard this at the beginning though. I needed that Buddhist introduction. But what began to resonate with me is this pointing that I am consciousness and not the person. And I know for all those people that have been listening for many years and are devout non-dualists, they'll be like, you're not consciousness, you're emptiness. And even in Buddhism, they say that too. But you start off with the teaching of consciousness. And then for those that have been listening for longer, you then begin to realize that consciousness is not a thing, doesn't exist, and yet it's all things. And your mind gets blown up. But we start with the teaching of consciousness. And that's a relief for a teacher to start with the consciousness. It's so hard to point out this subject because most people that are listening, most probably not the regular audience, but anyone that's new here or fairly new here, they're listening to me through their dream. So they're not actually listening to me. They're listening to me through their dream. So it's getting interpreted in all types of funky ways. So teaching, the consciousness teaching is a gradual opening. And what's so superb and ingenious about the consciousness teaching is the first thing that it teaches is recognizing, so moving to a witness place where you recognize that something is watching thoughts, feelings, sensations, and everything that's happening. Everything. And this is called a moving back to witnessing. So there is a noticing that everything you think, even the doer and the one that's moving the personal awareness, is being watched by something. And this isn't something I can point out for you. This is something you have to investigate for yourself. Who is that? What is that? Where is that? So there has to be a deep investigation. And this is where, Buddhist meditation training can come in really helpful to really investigate, to really go in. And yes, in. And eventually, yes, we realize there's no in or out. Go in and you begin to investigate, what is watching. So a thought can't be watching. So when a thought says, I am watching, that thought is being watched. So who is watching that? It's so ingenious, this teaching. So the one that says, I am enlightened, it's being watched. And the reason that you know it's being watched is because it's being seen. There's something that sees it. What's appearing in the dream is not the seeing, it's not like that thought is seeing itself. There has to be something prior to it to know that that thought is appearing. I used to think, and I didn't really know I thought this, but it sort of became apparent that I thought in order to experience, I had to think. That's not true because there was experiencing before thinking happened, and there's many times when you're not thinking and there's experiencing. So what is it that's prior to the thinking, the feelings, the sensations? What is it? Who is it? Well, what will begin to happen for lots of people is a movement back to witnessing, to watching the thoughts and feelings. And I mean, there's still thought involved in there. It's still mental abstraction, but you're watching it, but there's a separation from it. Before, you were the story, you were your thoughts, you were your feelings. But when the witnessing begins to happen, you begin to know that that's not true. That's not who you are. And you might not even notice that the witnessing is beginning to happen. It's just now that I'm reflecting it back to you. You're like, oh, yes, I've done witnessing for many years. But there is something deeper than witnessing, because witnessing is still in a mental realm. It's still the mind witnessing in a way, but it's detached from all the thoughts, feelings, and ideas. It's watching it from a place. And then once that begins to settle, and for some people, that can take a lifetime. And for some people, it's like really quick. It takes days or weeks, years. It's so different for everyone. And just don't judge the race on other people. When I was growing up, I had severe dyslexia, and I was put in an education system where I was taught to judge my progress by everyone around me. And it's an impossibility. Dyslexic people learn differently. So just don't judge. If it's 50 years you've been doing it, what a gift. And that's incredibly quickly. If you look at the whole scape of humanity and life and humans being identified. Yes. So then once witnessing's happened, then the funky stuff really begins. The funky stuff. The funky chicken. So what can begin to happen is energetic awakenings or Kundalini awakenings or disappearances where there is a movement into a big consciousness. The big consciousness is not an abstraction of the mind. It is there prior to the mind. Sometimes it happens for people and they begin to have like lucid dreaming. It sometimes appears as an emptiness. And sometimes it appears as great love. So there begins to be a movement to the big consciousness. And this can come with ecstatic bliss, joy. It can be incredibly scary. And this is called the disidentification from self. This is like the big waking up. And there is a deep knowing of a home and who you are beyond anything that appears in this world. And eventually, there is such a deep going into this consciousness, going far, far back into it, that this consciousness becomes empty and full. It's like a bridge that disappears, like an invisible bridge that disappears, and it's totally empty and full simultaneously. It's totally still and in movement. And this is what God is. This can have profound energetic movements on the body. It can create intense fears, intense energetic expression, intense bliss, as there is a going back into that. And then after there's a stabilization in that, then there's the process of the human body embodying that more and more, which I see that as endless process. Yeah. And to me, that is true happiness. And it's not about solving any goddamn problem. It's not about getting out of debt or sorting out your relationship. It's a totally inward, personal movement that's nothing to do with the phenomena world and the appearances. Yeah. And that is all I have to say on that. Yeah.